I'm here this morning with Paul Gordon Collier, and really excited to talk to Paul because every time I read one of your comments on my channel, Paul, I'm sort of stunned and amazed at, well, you're kind of a wordsmith in the same way that Matt is a wordsmith. So,
Matt, I'm
well, I've had Matt on my channel many times. He's a philosopher and a writer, and every time he speaks, it takes me a while to just absorb what he's saying and kind of unwind it in my mind and think about it. And then that's why your comments always strike me, is that I know there's something there, but I can't quite get the drift of it until I think about it a long time. And sometimes I have to ask you to clarify. So um, I, I I know a little bit about you. I know that at one time you were the editor of the Tioga Freedomist in Tioga, Pennsylvania, and that you ran a poetry journal called Logo Daedalus.
mhm.
And other than that, I don't know anything more about you and what you're doing now. And I would love for you to tell your story so that I would know a little bit about your growing up years and how you got to be who you are today and why you have an interest in this corner of the internet.
Okay. Well, why I have an interest this corner of the internet really comes down to my project, which is my apex existentiality thing I'm working on, which is we're going to talk about. And I am possibly developing a philosophy that I think has some novelty to it, but now I have to plumb line it. So I have to go out and see what are other people doing? What are they saying? And as close, I mean, the meaning project in general, it seems to be as close as I can get to what it is that I'm working on. I do have some differences, uh, but also really seeing Christians that know who Gauguin is. I mean, that's, I'm seriously, it sounds so silly, but I have all this art history knowledge. I mean, I'm not an expert or anything. I didn't even go to college for art history, but, I was an artist. Well, I get to that, but I have all this. I never get to use all this knowledge about all the different. And I'm a poet, and I have. I'm very much interested in numerous schools of poetry, the objectivists, the language poets, and there's nobody I get to talk to about anything like that. And then there's philosophy. I'm very interested in philosophy, and engaging with other Christians with philosophy is well, that's the devil's stuff. So you know, they look at what Peter said, warned us about not to trust in philosophies or traditions of men. Was it Peter? Am I get that right? And I I don't get to have these conversations with people. Paul Vanderklay. I did not come to Paul Vanderklay through Jordan Peterson. I heard about Jordan Peterson way before Paul Vanderklay. I made no connections. Didn't find him through anything there. And it was I think it was a video. It was one of these videos that he had where I don't know. I don't know if it was Heidegger or something like that that caught my eye, and then I started watching Paul Vanderklay, and he led me to well, I discovered you recently, and numerous other people, and Sherry that was on recently. She's a meetup on Thursday, and I'm going to go to that. And that was really fascinating. By the way, I love both of your art. I really do. And now I tend to lean towards the abstract expressionists in general, so I like less representational in general. So I kind of like really, I really love your expressionistic. I said Klimt und Gauguin is the feeling that I got from your painting, because the woman with these weird, the Klimt like textures within her body and clothing, and it was kind of primitivist, and kind of it had a folk primitivist kind of symbolist quality to it, which I think of Gauguin. So I mean, I don't get to talk to people about this that are Christians, so it's been a joy just discovering this whole neck of the woods. I've been complaining for years. Why aren't and I have some friends that are not Christians, and they know the kind of things I'm interested in. Like, how are you a Christian and you still like all this other stuff? And like, I think we exist. I'm not sure, but I think I'm not the only one. So that's essentially how I got here. And now, if you'd like, I'd like to get started on taking you through a journey, which hopefully will set you up to maybe understand what I'm working on with the apex existentialism. And I think I have an interesting story. It involves prophecies, prophecy that has come true. It involves, well, I'll just leave it at that for now. So supernatural stuff, all kinds of strange stuff. So I was born May 19th, 1968, in Polyclinic Hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and and this is relevant. I was born to with an identical twin. My identical twin was, well, I was in the line to go first, as it were, and my identical twin was on the top, and they had a C-section. So I would have been the firstborn, but they took out my identical twin first. Very significant. You'll see
Yes,
why.
yeah.
Um, so they take
know another
my
story
identical.
like that.
What's that?
I know another story like that.
There's a lot of stories like that. There's
Yeah.
a lot of older, younger in the Bible, and I'll get to that actually. So I was born second, and my identical twin, he was the weak one. He was the one taken to the incubator. I was the strong one. He got the name William Raymond Collier Jr. I'm Paul Gordon. He got Raymond Collier Jr. But we're not a Collier, actually. We're Weidenholz, but I'll get to that. So we're born, and we're cross-eyed. We're pretty almost non-functioning. People thought we were retarded, and we spent most of our first early years in the crib just together, and we had developed a language that we could speak to each other. Now this is anecdotal evidence. I've never seen any actual proof of the things I'm about ready to say, but this is the evidence that I've been told through my mother and family. When we were little, we were psychically linked, so that when my brother had something happen to him, I could feel it. When I had something happen to me, he could feel it. And then they said, and I think they got it the other way around. I just think they might have. My brother had an operation on his leg for a cyst on his leg, and he was in the hospital. I was in the bedroom, and about at home, and about the time that they had the operation, I was screaming in pain, and they had to help me. I don't know what they did, but I'm the one with the scar on my leg, so I don't know if I was the one there and he was. So I don't know, but the story goes that the government was interested in us. They wanted to take us and do experiments with us. And they were offered to pay my mother money, and she didn't accept the money or whatever. So we grew up in what would be a busted home. My mother and father got divorced pretty early, and had pretty unstable childhood. Went from place to place to place. We were in the '72 flood. I don't know if you remember. You're from California, right? Is that where you're calling from?
In 72, I was in Iowa.
Okay, so but still, you don't remember Agnes in '72. I don't think it hit you. Oh, I know it didn't hit you. You're a little bit inland. So at '72, the flood hit, and we were.
But you were in Pennsylvania. I remember a massive flooding in Pennsylvania back then.
Yeah. We were in Pennsylvania in Harrisburg, and we had a really nice house. And my mother, she's bisexual, so she was actually with her. I don't know if they really called themselves married, but her and a woman named Noni. So that was the couple situation that was there, and had a nice home. The home got wiped out, and we ended up in a fire hall. All these things that I'm telling you, hopefully what I'm setting up is what you're going to see again and again is I keep getting taken out of all of the frames of normalcy. I have very little of it. And I think that is what led me to maybe possibly some of the insight I have. We'll see. So when we're about 8 or 9 years old, my mother, we allegedly steal a bike. I don't remember it that way, but allegedly me, my brother, and my sister, we steal a bike. And my mother said that the police put pressure on her, said, either put your kids in this orphanage, even though we're not orphans, put your kids in this orphanage, or we're going to put your kids in juvie hall or reform school. We were little kids, so in juvie hall, but so, and there was some sort of cash for play thing allegedly that was going on there. You remember there was a cash for play program recently. That's where our cash for kids program, where they were taking kids off the streets and they were charging them with weird things to get them to go to the schools so that the school would get money from the government, and it was and then the judges would get kickback. We're allegedly part of a similar type of situation that happened, and we got sent to Scotland School for Veterans Children, and allegedly an orphanage, but we were not orphans. My father was still alive, but he wasn't in the picture. And when I went in the summer. So during the summer, nothing happened. And then after the summer was over, I went to what would be my new cottage. And my greeting for the new cottage was there was a boy. I remember we were in a bathroom. All of us were in a bathroom. And one boy forced another boy to rape another boy. And that was my introduction to Scotland. So again, I'm always taken out of the frame, it seems. So Scotland was not fun, but it wasn't horrible other than that opening incident. That was pretty difficult for me. But I was having a very difficult time, as you can imagine, putting myself into what I call a vehicle of power. But I didn't think of it that way, but a vehicle of power in which I could see myself extending into the world, and I could follow what I call my apex existentiality. And I became increasingly more withdrawn and introverted when I was alone. Well, I thought being alone. Outwardly, though, I was the class clown. I was always making jokes. That was my defense mechanism. So I started to create my own little worlds. I kept top tens of the hottest girls. I kept top tens of the top music. Like, I followed music like obsessively. I created a football league. A paper football league. But I did all kinds of these world creating things. And I remember in Scotland in third grade, the monumental encounter that I had, we had a social studies class. And in that social studies class, they walk you through the process of a city being created, of how a city is created. And I don't remember the exact scenario, but they take you through. They had to build the dam, and all of that was, wow, you could totally build your own world. This world sucks. You could build your own world. So I became a world builder. I started working on constitutions, started writing constitutions. My brother and I, we were writing constitutions and comparing our constitutions, and we developed governments, and we had friends, and they kind of became part of our governments. And we had, at one point, the whole Scotland, at least amongst our age group kids, we had kids fighting what were called the country city wars. At first I was the city and he was the country, and I didn't lead the city people, but I was really behind the city people, and my brother was the country people. And then I split off and I formed the suburban party. so so we were creating countries, nations, and so Scotland wasn't horrible, but wasn't great. And we left Scotland. My mother took us out of Scotland, and she took us into suburbia. And I should say, before Scotland was, I don't know what you call Scotland, institutional, but it was a lot of kids from Philadelphia ghettos. So it was a ghetto culture. Like, I still lapse into a kind of ghettoese at times because it's part of one of my cultures that I grew up with. But before that, I grew up in Harrisburg. I went to inner city poor. I was part of the slightly better ghetto. So I didn't live in the projects, but I lived in the row homes right next to the projects. So those were my frames. And then Scotland, after my mother took us out, and she took us to our grandmother and our grandfathers, and they weren't wealthy, but they were upper middle class, very upper middle class. And I went to a school there that was fantastic. It was upper suburbia, very, very different vibe. Really excellent. I was enjoying myself. I played flag football, and I was actually pretty good at it, even though I was a skinny little runt kid. And I should point that out too. I was a skinny little runt kid, but I was really fast and really agile. So I had some physicality that I might be able to express myself through. I had vehicles of power in the physicality that I could possibly express myself through, the flag football, but nothing else. So my mother takes us. My mother says, "Would you guys like to go back to Scotland?" And my brother and my sister said, "Heck yeah!" And I said, "No, I loved family. I loved the idea of family. Even as a kid, I treasured it. I treasured being in family situations, especially after my experience with Scotland. I really, really loved family. And now this part's a little bit difficult, so you'll have to pardon, but I think it's important to the story. So I was told that we were going to drive and we were going to take my brother and my sister back. Not me, my brother and my sister. And then we drove, we got there, and then when we got there, that's when my mother told me, Paul, you're staying. You're going here too. And that was the beginning of the end for me. I tried to lock the car doors to keep her out, and eventually, they got me out and they drugged me off. And what was interesting was I was in total grief, and I hated my mother. I said all kinds of horrible, maybe deserved, I don't know, but she was going, I don't want to paint my mother off as a horrible person. She was going through some really, really difficult. She was a very traumatized person herself and didn't have a lot of help. So she was kind of a psychological mess. So I kind of don't blame her. But as a kid, none of that matters. So I was pretty much, my familial vehicles of power were shut down. I was done in the familial sense, and I went from a hugger to, even today, I still have a hard time with hugging people in general. So I was in grief and pain. And then my friend Jerome said, do you want to play football? And again, I was pretty, even though I was a skinny, small kid, I was fast, I was agile, I was pretty okay. And just like that, it was like I was totally happy. I'd forgotten about my mother. I forgot the grief, and I had this wonderful vehicle of power that I could enter into that I was doing well at. I was like the tight end, and I was a really vicious kid. I mean, on that football field, I was very, very, I was so fearful in general, but on the football field, I was just like, I was an animal. They called me Killer Collier because I was so vicious. And after we were in Scotland for a couple of years, and then my father finally showed up, and he decided to invite us to go with him. And of course, we took the opportunity. And so we go from Scotland, School for Veterans Children, which is kind of an institutional ghetto, to the country. So we go to Perry County, Pennsylvania, and Perry County, Pennsylvania is per county, where the men are men and the sheep have restraining orders. That's the running joke. So, I mean, that is the Perry County joke. I'm sorry, it's a little crude, but that is the joke. That's the kind of environment that I went into. And when I first went into the environment, I was a skinny little kid, greasy hair, poor clothes. And maybe I should backtrack briefly. I tested high in all the areas. They tested me at Scotland. Both my brother and I, our reading levels were off the charts. But when we were in first grade, my brother and I were in the hospital for most of for first grade because we had liver issues. I still don't know what it was, but we almost died a few times, and we survived, but our growth was stunted. So they held us back a year. So now the whole time that I'm going through this, I'm highly intellectual, and I am held back a year. So you can imagine what school was like for me. It was horribly boring. It was bad. So they still kept us back a year, even though we kept testing high. We kept testing high. They never really, they never advanced us. So we go to West Perry, and West Perry is, it's the country. And those kids are very radically different than the kids in Scotland. In Scotland, if somebody looked at you wrong, they meant to fight you. So you had to be aggressive. So in West Perry, I go into West Perry in that situation. These are laid back country kids. And these laid back country kids, when they get up in your face, they're just getting up in your face. That's all they mean. But I don't know that. So I get in fights. So, there's a culture clash there. And again, I'm taken out of the frame. I can't really settle into the world. So I have to keep creating my own world. And my brother and I, we mapped out all of the mountains behind us and in front of us. It was a beautiful place where we lived, and it was really a nice area. And we had free reign. We could go fishing every day. and we mapped out the whole world. We made up our countries and cities and everything. And then something extraordinary happened. When I was about 7th grade, I woke up because I heard some noise. I didn't know what it was. And I walked out and I saw Civil War soldiers in my house. Civil War soldiers. And my brother was yelling at them like he was commanding them, like he was in the middle of a battle. And I looked out our back. We have a big sliding glass door, and we had this garden. And at the corner of the garden, I said, and I was not afraid, and I don't know why I was not afraid to this day. And I said, "Why are the gates of hell open in our backyard?" Because it looked like, and I felt like the gates of hell were open in the corner at the end of our backyard. Now that was, my brother has another side of that story in which he had a lot more stuff happening. He had the same vision too, except they weren't Civil War soldiers. They were soldiers for him, for something, for Eupidarian soldiers. And Eupidaria is a vision that my brother got from, well, I'll say allegedly, but I believe so, got from God. And the initial vision was when we were in Scotland during a race war. My brother was upset about the race war, and he went to this one rock and he felt like he had a vision from God, and it said the answer is UPDR. And UPDR, it's this diamond, and it has this cross in the center, but a diamond all the way around. And UPDR, my brother is a kid, and he remembers this: unity and diversity, popular sovereignty, democratic equality, and rule of law. At the time, he didn't really understand it. Now, back to West Perry days, after this vision, my brother and I are given the assignment to write about Thomas Hobbes' Utopia. Or not Thomas Hobbes, I'm sorry. Oh, who wrote Utopia? Not Thomas Hobbes.
My mind just went blank too.
Oh, sheesh. Let me Google it. Anyway, the book Utopia, my brother, well, I just wrote about the book, but my brother wrote this Eupidarian vision. Now, he does say, and he did say then, that he doesn't know like all parts which are of God and which parts are him. Most of it he believes is of God, and some of it he believes is him. And he wrote this pretty detailed description of not utopia, but this vision that God gave him.
Thomas
And
More.
Thomas More. Thomas, I got Thomas right. Yeah, thank you. I'm definitely having brain drains. I'm a little nervous because I'm sharing. Well, this is a little bit difficult to share, but I think it's important to share. So, as you can imagine, now I'm the supernatural world is more real to me than natural, and that's always been the case. I've always put meaning into things. I've always put. I mean, I had stuffed animals in my 20s, and I had characters. And when in my 20s, they weren't like little kids. I didn't. They were. I viewed them as characters that allowed me to explore myself. So things were in some cases more real to me. I mean, things had meaning, and the meaning in them was more real than. And even to this day, like for me, when I see things move, I can't say I hear motion, but I kind of hear motion. It's like a, not quite, but I hear motion. I don't know if in part that's because you want to say something?
Well, yeah, a couple of things. I just wanted to clarify about the seeing the Civil War soldiers. It wasn't that there was a Civil War enactment going on in your neighborhood or something. They actually weren't there, but you saw them. Is that the idea?
No, they weren't there. My brother saw Eupidarian soldiers, and I saw
Okay.
Civil War soldiers.
Okay.
No, they weren't
It was
there.
it was some kind of a vision.
It was a vision.
And then
And
when you talk about hearing motion, have you ever been tested for synesthesia or anything like that?
No, I haven't. I know about synesthesia, but I haven't been tested for it. No.
Is there any other senses where you have that feeling where things are kind of mixed up in the sensory area?
No.
Like some
I
people can see music and
No, I don't see music. No. But I have to keep a rhythm a lot. So I have to like, and I don't do this. Actually, I've been really training myself not to do it because I don't think. But for most of my life, I have to keep a rhythm, and so there's always got to be a beat in my head. So, but that's not quite the same thing. But
I resonate with that. I don't do it anymore, but once you brought it up, I remembered, oh, wow, yeah, I used to do that a lot in my younger years.
I wouldn't even think about it, and I just hear it, and I'd have to keep a beat. I'd have to, like, my fingers. It'd have to, wherever the beat is, it has to stop and then start at a logical, so the flow is right. So, and I think in part, I think my theory is basically growing up, I never really had access to settle into any identity and switching, and it's going to get worse. You'll see. And I believe that there's a significant part of me that doesn't believe that I exist, and that I'm constantly trying to prove to myself that. And I have to smell my hands. I have to. I just have to. And this is my theory that I've developed recently about why I do some of these things. And I do believe in part I don't exist, and I'm trying right now to develop. I mean, I have an identity in Christ, but I'm trying to develop a stronger identity in Christ because that is grounding me and that is making me more real within. It's a tremendous asset to have, to be able to center on a narrative that existed in the historic. You know, that's significant for me. That's why I could never be a Buddhist or any of these other folks, because no, Christ is a historic figure that entered into our world that I can pin my apex existentiality on. Well, I'll get to that.
Well, I
So
like the way that you frame it, that that in these in the stories you've told up to this point, that you felt like you kept being taken out of every frame, so you could never
mhm.
settle into anything. And that was certainly my experience growing up, because I grew up in a household where my dad was in the military, and we moved we moved probably every year to 2 years to 3 years during my entire growing up until I was probably a freshman in high school.
So
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
never got to know anybody, and we moved from country to
Yes.
country, so I'm
Mhm.
speaking different languages. And then
Yeah.
by the time we came back to the United
Well, you
States,
really are.
everybody thought I was weird because I spoke with a different kind of an American accent than they did, because I'd lived so many other places. I didn't really know what an American was supposed to sound like. And yeah, so I never really, I don't think I ever got an identity until I became a Christian at age 30. And even then, it took me a long time to realize that I belonged and that he loved me. It took a long time for that to sink in.
The he loved me part really took a while. Like, I was saved in 2001, but it
Uh-huh.
really took me 4 more years, and I had a Holy Spirit moment, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Um, but have you found, like, if you can, if you resonate with this, what I there's an advantage to being taken out of the frames. It's like John Vervaeke's talking about. You're coming out of the frame. You know, you're going towards, in a sense, you're you're pulling back in the, what do you call it, the opacity. So you're pulling out of the frame. You're in the opacity. So I was really hyper aware of myself, as much as I didn't think I existed. My thoughts and are I highly regulate my thoughts and actions. I'm constantly evaluating and thinking, and I'm thinking 5, 6, 7 years, 10 years, 30 years down the road, ramifications, because I keep getting taken out of these frames. So that's the good side. The bad side is that I never developed any real sense of accountability in any long-term sense. So I was very good at frivolous encounters, and I'm very good at frivolous encounters which I don't expect that I'm going to have to know this person for years and years on end, because I didn't develop. I'm developing now. I've been married for 20 years, so that'll help with that. But I didn't develop those. I didn't develop an attachment to the world. As a matter of fact, the world was essentially like, I have double vision, so the world is flat. So I see the world the same way I see television. So the world for me, for most of my life until my really about the same time as you, a little bit later, 32 for me, the world is basically it was it was a narrative for me to write on, and it wasn't real. It was poetry. It was art. It was a new constitution. So in I joined the army in, well, it doesn't matter when. I was 18 or 19. I joined the army. It was the first thing that I really gave my all in. It was the first real thing that I really tried in. And because of my double vision, I couldn't pass the shooting test, the range test. And they gave everything they could. They gave me all kinds of extra ammunition, all kinds of stuff, and it didn't work. You're supposed to get a 23. The most I got was a 20. I think out of 40 targets, you had to get 23 out of 40. And they're moving targets. They're popping up all over the place, and you got to shoot them with your M16. And I couldn't get it, and they gave me an option. And they said you could go through it again, no guarantees. No guarantees. You can go through it again and try it. I really didn't feel like I had a ghost of a chance, so I gave up. And it was devastating, heartbreaking. And I went home, and I lived with my mom, and I got a telemarketing job. And all this time, my only access to high art, high culture, anything I was exposed to, well, I did get exposed to Thomas More's Utopia, I guess, but it didn't take off for me, I guess. Well, basically Shakespeare. I went through a Shakespeare phase where I read all Shakespeare's plays when I was a kid, and I don't remember any of them anymore, but I remembered them. I was obsessed for a time. But other than that, I wasn't, because I went from place to place to place. I kept having, every time I went to a place, because we were poor and we looked like street urchin ghetto kids, we did. They just automatically put us in the low classes. So they put us in the low classes, and we'd have to demonstrate them. By the end of the school year, we'd be in the highest classes. But it was the same process every place we went. And what was I saying? School.
By this time you were living at home with your mom and doing a
Oh,
telemarketing.
right. Yes. So then I don't know where I heard about this thing. I heard about this thing called contemporary poetry. What is contemporary poetry? Well, that's interesting. I didn't even know what the word contemporary meant. Okay. 19 years old, high IQ, did not know what the word contemporary meant. So I go to the library, and I happen to go to the, I think ultimately it was a God thing, although it kind of led me to I guess I could say an ungodly place. I discovered Sylvia Plath, Ariel. Do you know Sylvia Plath?
The bell jar.
Bell jar is the novel, but
Yeah.
I was interested in her poetry, but I did used to sleep with the bell jar under my bed. So there is that. Well, it's not her novel; it's an autobiography novel. It's novellic autobiography. But I was obsessed with Sylvia Plath. I was obsessed with Ariel. Edge, the woman is perfected, her dead body wears a smile of accomplishment. The illusion of a Greek necessity flows in the scrolls of her toga. Her bare feet seem to be saying, "We have come so far, is over. Each dead child coiled." Oh, now I can't remember the rest. Well, I can remember the rest, but anyway, that last poem, allegedly the last poem she wrote before she killed herself. As I said, she baked her potato one destined night. That was from a poem I wrote called "The Western Wench." It was a 9-page poem, and I went to a poetry meeting, open poetry reading to read my poem, and I met Bill Keckler there. And he's a person I also helped run Logodedalus, and he and we clicked. Like his poet, he was a poet. He knew French, he knew Latin. He was 4 or 5 years older than me, but in terms of his intellectual development, he was a giant, and I was, an infant. But I had this hunger, and he kind of took me under his wing, and we were just palling around. But he was gay, but I didn't care if he was gay or whatever. That wasn't a problem. But I loved Bill. It was like my other in a sense. And my mom threw me out of the house. I can't remember why. And Bill said, you can stay with me. And in the course of, I don't know how long, but eventually we became basically lovers. I'm not gay, but we became lovers. We became a couple. And we were together in a couple kind of status. I lived there for 13 years, but it was really for about 9 of those years where I would consider us in a relationship. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but primarily the biggest reason that we were in a relationship was Bill was the magic key to the new God that I had discovered through Sylvia Plath, which was art, which was poetry. I was totally consumed with the arts, with poetry. I wrote music. I still write music. I've written screenplays. I've written poetry. I do visual art. Although my visual art I now do is all I do now at this point is I just do. I use a publisher and I create computer visual abstract expressionist type stuff is what I really like. But I went through a representational phase just to prove I could do it. I'm not saying I did it well, but I'm competent. I can do representational art if I want to, but I'm not really driven by it. But that was my life. And Curt Schwitters was kind of like Jesus to me. And it might be that whatever version of Curt Schwitters in my head is not real, but what I remembered, Curt Schwitters was a German. Sometimes he's called a Dadaist poet or a Dadaist artist, and I love the Dadaists. That's my favorite school of art. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Dadaists?
Well, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I love like Tristan Tzar is my favorite Dadaist poet, and Guillaume Apollinaire, who then becomes a surrealist. But I was obsessed not so much with Curt Schwitters' art. I like his art. I like his mirrors paintings. That's what he's most famous for. But I really loved his story. The two things that stood out was this one story where Curt Schwitters is walking across the street, and just he sees a little scrap of blue paper, and he's so oblivious. He doesn't even care about the traffic. He's just so driven to be an artist that everything in the world is about getting that blue piece of paper, because that's the right blue piece of paper for his collage. And that was me. And then the story goes that I remember, which I may not be remembering correctly, but there is largely true. There is a thing called the Schwitters house, which is unfortunately gone. It's been bombed. But the way that I remembered the story, Curt Schwitters was given an inheritance, which was this house that he could rent to. So he could rent. This was going to be his source of revenue, and he started to build the sculpture in his house. Kind of his apartment. He lived on the basement. That's just wonderful. So he lives on the basement, and he creates a sculpture that grows and grows and takes over his whole apartment. And then as a tenant moves out, instead of putting a tenant in, he adds his sculpture. And by the time he's done, either most of the house or all of the house is completely done over in the Schwitters house. You can Google Schwitters, Schwitters, Schwitters house. And that was to me Jesus. That was my artistic genius, Jesus was Curt Schwitters. And I had two apostles. I had I'm trying to remember. Marcel Duchamps was my one apostle. I can't remember the second one off.
Now, was that Marcel Duchamp's paintings, or was that his signed urinal?
Well, actually, it was a sculpture called, and I never get this title right, Bride Stripped Bare by Her Suitors, or I always want to say Bride Stripped Bare by Her 7 Suitors evenly. And I don't think that's correct, but that's how I always remember it. But it's a sculpture. It has a wheel and stuff done to it. And then in front is this broken glass. And Marcel Duchamps, John Keats. John Keats was my other apostle, but not because of his poetry. His poetry's, I never really got into. Well, I didn't really spend a lot of time in general in 18th and 19th century poetry. I went right to modern poetry, for the most part, modernist and whatnot. But Duchamps has a story which may or may not be true. At the time, I totally believed it, and it may not be, but it doesn't matter. I believed it, so that was my frame I entered into, in which he described how he had so meticulously planned everything for the sculpture. Like, this wasn't our mutt, that's the urinal. uh, he had planned everything meticulously, and he was taking the sculpture, and the window was supposed to be in front, and he's taking the sculpture over, and during the process, an accident happens, and that's where the crack happens. And the crack was beautiful, and it worked, and it was perfect, and it was this blend of chaos and order, and how the artist, the goal of the artist for Duchamp, as he's describing this, the goal of the artist is to allow for the chaos to form the order, or allow the order to be altered by the chaos, and that is where the art happens. And I'm reading Mathieu Pajot's book, and now I'm starting to understand a lot more why that's true, because the chaos is the outside. It's chaos in a sense. Chaos is time unbridled, right? I don't know if you've read Mathieu Pajot's book yet.
I still haven't finished it, but I've read.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't
finished
finished it either. I'm up to 140, page 140, I think, and I go through a little, and then I let it germinate.
The ideas just get so dense that, and I have so many other people that I'm talking to that I have to read books for, that I'm running from book to book.
Well, his book is so his book is so dense. It's like a highly condensed seed of DNA that's dropped on you.
Yeah.
And so what I've been doing is I read parts, and I'm very utilitarian. If ideas have to be usable, if they're not usable, I don't want anything to do with them. I have to be able to extend them into my real life. I'm very utilitarian that way. Even my faith I have to convert to realness, to day to day. So his stuff is like a toy for me. So I learn a little, and then I have to go and play with it for a while and get it to sink in. And then, as a matter of fact, I was just reading some recently, and again, I'm going to have to go and play with it. So Duchamp gave me methodologies, and then the start of methodologies, and then John Keats gave me the underlying philosophy, which really I should not give to John Keats, but because apparently it wasn't John Keats, it was probably Lao Tsu. And it's the phrase, the utility is what John Keats called negative capability.
Okay, just as
you were saying
that, you broke up. So you were saying the utility of something.
The utility of the bowl is in the empty space. And this is, I believe it's Lao Tsu. Although I thought it was John Keats.
Love that.
Right. So, and then what John Keats calls is negative capability. So negative capability, the idea of negative capability in art is, if you really think about even the balance of the chaos and the order, there's just enough of a frame for you to hold your hat on, but there's enough missing that allows you to fill it with what you want to fill it in. Now, what I look at that now is art that gives you a vehicle of power to enter into. And it's the emptiness. It's what's not said. It's I can't remember the quote. Laurie Anderson had a quote, which I can't remember exactly, but it was something along the line, "Shut up and make a mistake so I can hear you think." There's something like that. And I'm very drawn to the idea of mistakes and the utility of allowing for mistakes to germinate, if you will. Don't stamp out heresy so quickly. I'm not saying you don't stamp out heresy, but don't stamp it out so quickly. And
one of my very first, I think my very first teacher that I had, I started painting when I was 50, and I was taking a little watercolor class, and just learning how to paint a vase of flowers or paint a little village scene or something like that. And I was terrible for the first few years. I just kept wanting to quit because everything just looked so bad. But my teacher was really great, because she could be sitting on the other end of the room talking to another student, and she'd be watching me paint, and all of a sudden she'd turn around and she'd say, "Stop now, Karen." Because the worst thing you can do is go too far. If you go too far, you fill in all the spaces, and there's no place for the viewer to connect anymore. There's no fuzzy edges for the viewer to connect to, right?
That's why I really resonated when I was watching that video with you and Sherry, and you had this one point where you were talking about you said about not being too in love with your parts.
Yeah.
and you had that guy and you really loved that guy and you're
Yeah.
like, he's got to go. And I can relate to that. It's you know, when you in a is, I think, in part how the artist creates that negative space is you have to allow for imperfection. As a matter of fact, you have to welcome it. You have to welcome the imperfect in your art. You have to. You were talking about how Michelangelo always makes a little error. I
Mhm.
think that in part, one of the reasons why Michelangelo makes an error is it's kind of like the Catholics at that time. They were still far closer to the Eastern Orthodox than they are now. And the Eastern Orthodox, if you look at their iconography, you notice that their iconography, there's a certain amount of restraint. There's a like their iconography is not high art. I mean, it is in a sense, but it's not, and it's intended to be. It's not intended to be. You're not supposed to fall in love with the artist. You're not supposed to fall in love with the craft and the factitious. You know, the illusion. I have this whole thing that this is my early start of my philosophy. Early on, I was obsessed with the factitious, with the is, was, and always will be of the factitious. When you come before, I made the analogy of the when you come to the stoplight and you see the stoplight, you know, it's very well crafted object. Very, I mean, it looks highly designed, highly intentional, highly functional, red, yellow, green, and you say it here, and you don't even think about it. And because of that eternality about it, and this is, I didn't realize I was really kind of echoing Heidegger here, and what Heidegger was talking about, how science and technology have become this, they've become the new magical that you don't question, you
Yeah.
know? So if you had, you know, if you could enter outside of the frame, although I wouldn't put it that way, outside of the frame of the factitious, and you can look at that object and see the mess. So this is what Michelangelo was doing, was making sure that you knew, I am an artist. This is just a fallible thing that has been created. Because if you enter outside of the frame of the factitious stoplights, then you'll question, well, why red, yellow, and green? Why those three colors? That doesn't make any sense. Why did we pick red, yellow, and green? Now, I don't know exactly why, but I came up with a theory, which is essentially red sticks out like I mean, red really blasts. I mean, if you want, and we have a cultural association which existed before the stoplight of red kind of meaning alert, alert, you know? So what what would be the color that you would most want to associate with or to be a contrast to red? Well, its complementary color is green, so the
Mhm.
opposite color, right? You know color theory, like I don't know color theory. I only scratch the surface, but and then the yellow in between is kind of the transition color. uh, uh, you can't make it orange; it'll look too much like red. You can't make it blue; it'll look too much like green. Yellow is the contrast between those three. So that made sense to me. But that, you know, I'm thinking, you know, would I have thought about that a long time ago if I hadn't been sucked into the factitious? So I was sucked into the factitious. So I live with Bill, and I I I I was not gay. I was very much attracted to women. Still am. Been married for 20 years to a woman. And I was willing to sacrifice my heterosexuality, my romance for the one thing that I do better than anything else in the world is write. I'm a very good writer. Um, I can write, and I've written over probably at this point 13,000 poems. And I say that because there was a 3 year period of time where I wrote 10 poems a day, every day, religiously. And now they're mostly crap poems, and I did it because a poet said, and it might have been Sylvia Plath, I can't remember, who said that if you ever want to be a good poet, you have to write 10,000 poems. I said, I'm going to write 10,000 poems. So, so I've written at least 10,000 poems, uh, maybe 13,000. So I've written
See,
screenplays.
that's a principle of art right there that I really love, and there's a great story in this little book, Art and Fear by Orland and Bales. Terrific book. It
Hmm.
almost Secret of the Universe is in that book. Um,
Let
And
me hold on. I'm gonna write that down.
yeah,
Uh,
art, all right,
let me-
hold it up again. Art and Fear by Orland and Bales. And you
I
really
hope they
only
have.
have to read the first 50 pages of it because the rest of it's about marketing. But the first 50 pages is about what does it mean to do art? What does it mean to be an artist? And they're talking about writing and sculpting and music and painting, all of it is what does it mean to be an artist? But they tell this story about this professor, and he was a professor of pottery, and he had a college class of kids, and he took the kids on the first day and he separated them down the middle of the class, and he said, okay, everybody on this side of the class, you'll be graded at the end of the semester on how beautiful your pot is. You bring in a pot, and how, the ones that have the most beautiful pots will get the A's. And then on the other side of the class, he said, you will be graded on how many pounds of pots you produce.
Huh.
And at the end of the semester, not surprisingly, the beautiful pots came out of the ones that were producing poundage, pot after pot after pot after pot. And the ones that were trying to produce the beautiful pot got completely immobilized by just trying to figure out how to make it the most beautiful pot. But the other ones just kept throwing pots. And then eventually
Hmm.
the beautiful ones showed up. And that's the way it is. My painting teacher used to say, you need brush mileage. That's all you need, brush mileage. And you're going to have to paint 1,000 paintings before you get something good. You just got to keep
Now
doing.
now the title of that is Art and Fear. So I wonder if my daughter is a poet and she's 16 and she's very good. Like I read her poetry. And your poetry is better than a lot of adults. I mean, good quality adults. I mean, good quality adult poets, not adults. And she's having a hard time writing, and she's having a hard time writing. Because I tell her, saying, you have to write a lot of poems. There's just no way around it. And the reason that she isn't is because she's afraid to not create something good.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I have to tell you, when you commit to writing 10 poems a day, you have to be not afraid to not write something good.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's
Well,
where the book
absolutely.
takes you, but
That was the whole thing. The first time I read that book, I had all these fears that, you're such a fraud. You're not really a painter. You're just you're just trying to fit in here, and you're really an imposter, and you got nothing going, and you're a fraud. And so every time I would face a blank piece of paper, I'd be just terrified, well, this one may not be as good as the one that came before, and what if I can't really paint, and all these. And so I would go off and organize something, or I'd clean something, or I'd get involved in reading a book or something, anything to turn off the fear. And then I read that book, and he starts describing what it is to be an artist, and what it is to be an artist is to be filled with fear. that you can't create, and that you're a fraud, and that you're an imposter. And he said that's exactly what every artist has to fight through every single day of their lives. So this
you
one of
have
the
to.
reasons I learned to love Jordan Peterson is he gave me a matrix to work through on that, where I could say all of the new information is in the chaos, and you have to fearlessly journey into the chaos to capture the treasure that's hidden there. And it's just a matter of doing it day after day after day.
Chaos is where the unexpected connections happen.
Yep.
The ones that you cannot mathematically plan out.
Yep.
It's like when John Vervaeke's talking about the 40,000 years ago when they developed that. What's the word phrase he uses? Is it psycho tools, or what's the word he uses there? Psychic tools, whatever it is, where the shaman learns the methodology to frenzy themselves up, whatever they got to do, whether it's smoking this or looking deep into the night sky for hours, whatever methodology they did that took them outside of the frame of order and put them into the chaos where the flow started to happen, and the intuitive, he calls it intuitive. I have a word for it. I call it well, I believe in heuristic institutions, but I'll get to that. But so yeah, he's talking about going outside of your normal action. And now for me, my normal was abnormal. Well, man, my normal was outside the frame for the most part. It's constantly. And here I am once again. I am in a homosexual relationship, and I'm giving it everything to be. I'm not trying to be a homosexual, but I'm trying to be a good partner. But I can't be a homosexual. I just and I'm trying to be a good partner because in every other area in life, I love Bill. Like we're totally in sync. Like if I ever, well, I think if I met a woman version of him, it would probably end almost as bad as how he and I would almost, well, would end. But and that's because we're just two highly intense artists tend to become, no matter, it's just difficult not to be competitive. And as I grew in my abilities, I never learned French, I never learned Latin, but my vocabulary increased and it became on par with his. And my understanding of history actually is better than his because history is my thing. I love, of all the things that I would say history is, and I was obsessed with the Romans so for a long period of time. It's interesting is I'm going to read part of a poem at the end of this thing here. And you'll hear it in the poem, and I want to read part of this poem because that poem. Well, I'll get to it, but I was getting feedback. I was getting rewards from the world that says, "Yes, we recognize you." I was a published poet. I've been published in places around the world. I've published in Japan, France. I don't know why those things tickle me that I was published there, but Logodaedalus has been collected in, I believe, every once in a while I check to see if there's anything. And Penn University has one of our audio issues in its collection, and I think that's pretty cool. I've been published in Columbia Poetry Review, which is a very high. So I'm getting this. This is the only area in my life really that I've ever been given this type of recognition. So this is my vehicle of power. This is how I can become a god. This was my religion, and I was looking to replace Marcel Duchamps. I mean, I was looking to replace Curt Schwitters. He was a Jesus that I was going to replace. I was a word of faith artist, basically. If you know the word of faith movement, there's a lot of, but so I wrote for years, and I got to the point where in January 1st, 1999, I was going to write the poem. It was going to be the poem that would capture the zeitgeist of the most significant period of time in human history, which was the changing of the millennia, going into the second millennium. So I wanted to capture that. So I can't say that I wrote every day, but of the 365 days, I probably wrote at least 360. I don't think I missed more than 5 days. Every day I wrote a little bit. I kept a journal. I wrote this thing by, and the goal was basically, I'm going to write this thing from year to year. And on December 31st, 1999, I was going to write my last lines, and then I was going to edit the poem. So on December 31st, 1999, I wrote my last lines, and the poem was done. It was 140 pages long, and the next day, I went through, spent all day, January 1st, 2000, and I pared the poem down to 100 pages. So it's a 100-page poem. It still is mostly a 100-page poem. And the poem has been, I'm still working on it 20 years later. I still don't know the title. The working title is still it's Dance at the Closed Door. It was called Wretched. It was called Vulgar. And it's still called that's the one that it's been for the last 8 years, is Dance at the Closed Door, which it may end up being. I broke it up into 10 parts. I didn't originally have it that way, and I gave it French ballet names for each of the 10 parts for a French ballet movement. I can't remember what the movement was, but And for me, that poem, I I became Jesus in a sense with that poem, because for me personally, I had accomplished everything that I wanted. I was the alchemical poet. I had recreated the world. I had flung the world on its ear and redefined everything. Not in any kind of clear sense, because this is poetry. I wasn't writing philosophy. And that day, by the time I was done drafting my poem, and I had the 100 pages, and really the drafting was just, it wasn't that, it was just cutting stuff out. So that sucks, that sucks, that sucks. And then looking, I saw I had 100 poem pages, and I read like the first parts of it, and I was like, okay, I'm not saying it's amazing, and this is why I'm going to read it, because I'm going to hold myself accountable in a sense. But for me, this was amazing. This was a masterpiece. I had done it. I had done Sylvia Plath. I had, I had, I'd given my whole life, everything, my heterosexuality, my romance. I had given up my college years. I only have an associate's degree because after I went to Harrisburg Area Community College, I got an associate's degree. Then I went to Penn State, and I didn't take any classes that made any sense. I just took art and poetry and whatever. I didn't even try to get a degree. I was just trying to learn for art's sake. I studied philosophy, I studied language theory, and all of the philosophy and all of the language theory, none of it was applied to anything other than the aesthetic. I was Soren Kierkegaard's. I was the pure aesthetic. I was that guy, and I was Curt Schwitters. Everything that I did was centered around art, obsessively. And then when I wrote the poem and I looked at it, I still had a headache and I still had to go to work. Nothing had changed. And that was the end. That was the end of me and Bill. And then it was a year process escaping. And I won't go into that, but that was a difficult, that I wanted to separate. He didn't. He was obsessed with me and I was not obsessed with him. And I was probably not a great human being, really. Because artists are terrible people. I don't know if you know this, but I have been around a lot of artists, and I can say I hardly like any of them. And that's why I'm anxious to meet Christian artists, because I think that they're going to be very. For the artist, without Christ, that is their Christ, and that was my Christ, and I was devastated. I was broken, and I had no identity, and I went through a period of just mental breakdowns. I tried to commit suicide, took 72 sleeping pills, and I remember when I woke up, and I cried for 3 days because I was still alive. That's the place that I was in. And they got me a little healed up, and I went back out. I was homeless for a while, and then I got taken into some program, and I did something to get kicked out of the program. And then I said, I'm going to give the mental hospitals one last chance to fix me. And Bill, who found me, he drove me to the hospital. And the hospital that he drove me to was the Harrisburg Hospital. But they transferred me to the Polyclinic Hospital. Now, if you remember the beginning of the story, I was born in the Polyclinic Hospital. And in the Polyclinic Hospital, I sat across from a crazy lady with her hair all over the place, mad looking woman, in one of these group therapy meetings. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? My luck, that's the woman I'll end up marrying. That is the woman I ended up marrying. I'm married to her. She's 20 years later. So I want to read to you a part of this poem, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not.
We've got some time left, so yeah.
And I'm not doing this. Well, I'll just. You get a sense of what I was dealing with and where my head is. But what I hope you'll see in this, at least I think, is even though I was a rabid atheist, I was a militant atheist. I hated Christians. I hated Christianity. I think that you're going to hear a lot of Christianity in this. At least I think so. So I'm going to read this. In this wretchedness, source of metal's heat, it's easy to see nothing. These councils of self to self, where the dust blows on radical concepts of nothing, being for others, following baseball scores. The two ideals life's built, grace and self preservation. Bad faith, strange forest where birds and leaves are not discernible. What is conversion? Being source and heat's radical nothingness, a total escapist solution to what one sees and cannot believe in. A machine exercises alone, pointlessly, condemned to believe in its own exercise. The ribs, the scapulas are flexible, not as rigid as a metal frozen in its plate design. Some organs interpret, others react. The machine could be playing baseball or writing a dissertation on radical nothingness. Battles for mechanical design. The Germans and the French made cars together. The Serb and the Albanians sing songs of harvest. Streets where bombs fell, streets where bombs did not fall. The Jew and the Muslim slept on Saturday, slept on Sunday, walked into the market square and paid the same taxes. The least bit of thing falls at the first sense of living, where we remember ourselves more than instinct. You'll swallow wretchedness, but not the same ennui, that phantom which slid over the clear image of sky and valley and creek and plain, escaping the purple dust which sifts to the bottom of the sky, laying red caparisons on the trees, the deer, the cars, the homes, the schools below. No torch, no ennui into the turbines, jet contrails against a purple swath cutting below the blue-black ceiling. The animal releases itself from itself, pulls back and spins into the great shift, being a like history, somewhere into that radical nothingness where we create creatures, machines, minerals, breathe the same space. The world, at frenetic perspectives, the catalyst to motion, becomes the need to discern oneself from the soil, the loose rocks and pebbles along the side of the street, parking lots, scraps of food, tempers behind the wheel of a car, all release, say nothing. The great spirit of thing exhales, the great spirit of being exhales. Their breaths mingle and become a purple strip of light below a blue-black block. And that's just the opening, but that's
Now, there's a rhythm to it that reminds me a lot of, and I don't remember the poem at all. I just remember the rhythm of this poem. I was an English and drama major in college in my undergraduate, and one of the classes we had to take was oral interpretation. And one of the things that I did for an assignment was a poem by John Dos Passos, and it had that same sort of a driving rhythm. Just,
I know of him, but I haven't read any of them ever.
Oh, okay. Well, I should go back and find this poem because he was, in many ways, he was talking about a prophetic future in the same way that at least that's what I think you were saying. A lot of what you were saying sounded very prophetic, talking about, basically talking about machine learning and
I
the
didn't even think
technology.
of that.
You didn't.
And I don't know what it is that I wrote. I still don't know. And I think, though, that there is what I find uncanny, and I'm not going to read other, but I talk about Elam, Harappa, a lot of history in this. But so much of it is written. I don't know if I can find this one section here that is about. I mean, I have a lot of God references in here too. And I mean, this was I mean, the style is basically this is free flow, free writing is what I did here for the most part. I and then I crafted it afterwards. But and then it's kind of Matta. I've told you about. I think I mentioned Matta in your one of your things. I
Mhm.
talked about. I mentioned Matta. But I love Matta because Matta, what he did, I look at free writing as that is smudging the canvas. So you smudge the canvas with, you just let it out. You just flow, and again, you're not afraid to sound stupid. You're not afraid to be an idiot. Uh, and then you go back, and then you find, you don't want to find the order, you want to find the shadow of the order, in essence, not the full order, because if you make it too ordered, then you take out the whatever it is that you were tapping into there, that and you know, and this is kind of like what the romantics were all about, I think, although I don't fully understand the romantics. But if I understand the romantics, they were really trying, again, they were trying to take us outside of the frame, and they were fighting against the logic and the reason, and saying, no, there's more. We have to we have to allow the we you know, we have to allow the dragons on the outside. We have to give them the space to live. That's what they were saying. I think that's how I interpret them. But that,
Well, one of the things about composition in art is that they usually say you have two choices. You either do a closed composition or an open composition. And a closed composition is when the subject is all within the frame. Most portraiture is done that way, right?
mm-hmm.
But an open composition is one in which the subject extends beyond the frame. So you'll notice in most abstract art or cubist art, or even in some of the impressionist art, when they would have a crowd of people, some of the people would be on the periphery going outside the frame. So as a viewer, you can look at it and you can imagine what goes on beyond the outside of the frame. And so it's a way of capturing the attention of the viewer, a way of capturing the imagination of the viewer to that which is not seen, right? So
well, you know, that's something I liked about Sherry's art. Sherry's hyper realistic.
mhm.
But and you commented on how, what her out, the one with the red, the red palette there with the ice, and I think you had commented about how, I forget how you phrased it, but how that you had allowed the outside not to be defined, and it was like there was a chaos that was allowed to. It was a suggestion, if you will, of something beyond, and that, in another sense, that's also the, I can't imagine a painting of ice that I would really, really like as much as I liked her paintings, because she has that negative capability where the outer edges are, there's something there, there's something beyond what you can see.
I don't know how
So
many things you've listened to on my channel, but a lot
I
of,
am, I just discovered you recently, but I have listened to, I think, about 8 or 9 videos, so I'm still going through you.
well, quite a few of them, we talk about this idea of edges or boundaries and what the function is of edges. And you find this scaling all through all of creation, really, down to cell, the boundaries on a cell, the boundaries on humans. There's always a place where it's permeable. There has to be a gate. There has to be an opening that you can get through. Things have to be able to move in and out. And
Mm-hmm.
in art, it's the same way. Your edges can't all be hard edges, because if they are, it's just poster art, basically. If you want to have art that invites the viewer in, the edges have to, there can be some hard edges, but those are mainly leading your eye through the frame. But there have to be some soft edges that leave space for the imagination, that make connections between the background and the foreground, or that connect two objects together, so that you're painting relationships rather than painting things. And
Yeah,
the
I
world
like
works
that.
that way. We go all the way up from smallest scale up to the largest scale, but from each level, there has to be a way to get out of that boundary up into the next level, out of that boundary up into the next level. We're always moving up through these boundaries.
Yeah, and also the boundaries aren't real. There is no clear boundary. I mean, we perceive clear boundaries, but there's always a, like, if you, and I know, you know, if you blur in on the line at some point, it's going to distort it, like
Mhm.
what the impressionists and the pointillists were telling us or
Mhm.
showing us, and how that they were doing their art. And you step back and there's these clear delineations, but when you step in, you start to see, like, whoa, that's a mess. And even the philosophers and what they're discovering, and the way that they've tried to divide the, what is it, the ordinary language, ideal language. Wittgenstein talks about, he starts off with ideal language, which leads him to the conclusion that philosophy is dead. And then he switches over to ordinary language, which leads him to the conclusion that philosophy's dead. But now what they're saying is, well, there's no real difference, like the overlap between ordinary and the ideal language. Whether you're talking about the logicist project, where they're trying to develop the ideas that the syntax of logic is what you could use to frame the entire world in and understand the world through, and the argument is that no, there's a, I mean, and then the biologists are saying, well, we can't use that. We can't be phenomenological because we have to actually ask oughts. Why is this bird? Why are the birds going south? They have to ask the questions. They can't just phenomenologically examine. And so those languages, even now, like, I don't know the name of the philosophers right now, but I mean that I'm trying to think of right now, that line is blurred. So they don't even have that anymore. There's no clear delineation between ideal and ordinary language anymore. So everywhere they try to find the clear delineations, they can't find them. Material, is it the atoms? No, it's quantum. And now there's the theory that that time and space are basically the result of the collapse of observation. They're not properties in and of themselves. Time and space are created by the quantum collapse or whatever it's called. And so we can't find these lines anywhere. But yet we build our whole world around them. And I think I'm about ready, if you'd like to. I don't know how much time you have, but I am ready to start moving into the apex existential. I think I've set up like kind of how I've gotten to the point where I am. Hopefully you'll see by what I've described that I've been so taken out of these frames, but at the same hand, I've been inside multiple frames that most people like. I've been in the homosexual frame and the heterosexual frame, like deeply in both. I understand, like in Christianity, like it's the biggest struggle for me is understanding homosexuality in Christianity and how we resolve. Like, I think one of the reasons why homosexuality is such a weapon of war against the Christians is because the Christians themselves, because we have homosexual friends and family. And when you tell us that we have to cut out our family members and our friends from this opportunity to become a member of Christ, and they have to give up their romantic love. Like, I know what that's like. And that is existentially devastating. So, it's hard for me to center into a war with any faction because in some part I've been in almost every faction. I've been a Democrat, I've been a communist, I've been a capitalist, I've been a anarchist, a Christian conservative, and an anarchy. That was my most recent, and I still mostly consider myself an anarchist, sort of. But I've been an anarcho-capitalist and ANCOM, and all points in between I've explored. And even in poetry, I've explored like many different schools of poetry, and I've tried. And my poem has a lot of different schools of poetry in it. What you saw was basically kind of a cubist style, like T.S. Eliot, kind of, if you read T.S. Eliot, he's kind of the cubist. I think because of that I have been able to, like, even my Christianity, I didn't come through Christianity through churchianity. I'm totally outside of churchianity. I wasn't absorbed by it. I'm totally not invested in it. It's not a wine skin that I'm owned by. I'm owned by Christ. I'm not owned by churchianity. So I could see outside the church frame. And I look at the churches today, the church model today, and I see the church model as, I kind of feel like the way that we church, well, the only way we church is basically, for the most part, we go on Sunday and we worship together. And the whole community is built around that Sunday service, fundamentally. Even when you connect to a church, the biggest question is, what's their service like? Everything is framed around this service. And that was fine when the church was part of a Christian civilization. But when it's no longer part of a Christian civilization, it's kind of like hands and feet with no body. It emerged from civilization, from a Christian civilization. So it was an outcrop of the total Christian civilization. Everywhere you went was Christ. And it was, who is it? Sociology guy. Who's the father of sociology?
You don't mean John Dewey?
No, before him. Um, oh, what's his name? Oh, I get brain cramps. But anyway, he was very much for getting rid of tradition, and tradition is old fashioned, inefficient. And he was describing how the the people how they gather the harvest. And they gather the harvest and they have some ritualistic whatever stuff. And, when you come along, you're like, hey, you could do this more efficient. And he's like, you should get rid of the tradition and do it more efficient. And it's like, well, wait a second. That harvest was about way more than the harvest. That tradition was one of the significant ways in which these people were reaffirming their world and walking through it. That was the Christian civilization. There was a whole everything. You didn't have to worry about whether you could be Christ at work, because Christ was at work. Christ was work. And when secularism comes in and the church leaves, the only thing that's left is these hands and feet. Maybe not even hands and feet, maybe just fingers and toes. Maybe that's what churches are today. They're just these unconnected, disembodied fingers and toes. And everybody is satisfied just to see people get saved and walk deeply in their walk with Christ so that they can go to work and they can continue to be relying on a secular system that wants to kill them. I mean, not literally, but maybe sometimes literally. And that's, the atomization that has occurred. And
Well, I can tell that we have a lot more to talk about than just where we've gotten to here. And I'm wondering if you have time to do another one, because we're already at an hour and a half, and that generally is
absolutely.
not as long as people want to go. But before we wrap, so maybe we could save the apex existentiality for the next time, because I am interested in hearing about that. But I wonder if you could just take us back and finish up one little part of your story. You left us sitting in the mental hospital in a group looking at the woman across the way from you who was going to become your wife. How did you get through that tough time? What got you out of that spot?
I would say first and foremost, supernatural. Not anything like what I described earlier, but everything's supernatural to me. Like washing dishes is supernatural. But I would say it was a supernatural invention of God, intervention of God. Uh, I I talked to my wife, Jenna, and she seemed pleasant to talk to. And I did this test on people, and the test to see if I really wanted to engage with them is I would, and there was a keyboard, there was a piano there, and I would tell them about the pentatonic scale. And the pentatonic scale, for simplistic purposes on the keyboard, all the black keys are one pentatonic scale. There's another one that's not all the black keys, but that's the easiest one. Just hit the black keys. Just tap the black keys. You can't hit a wrong note. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but tap the black keys. You can't hit a wrong note. It's going to sound great no matter what. Tap the black keys. And I would ask people to tap the black keys and see what they did. And every single person, man, woman, and most children, although children were less likely, or like more likely to do what I would want to see, they would just kind of pluck nervously, ploop, 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 ploop. And I gave it to my wife. And now she just took off with it. She had fun and just like, blah, blah, it was wonderful, magical. I was like, I was drawn to that. And my wife's very peaceful presence, like just awesome. And I was gravitated to her. Now, at this point, during the last year, I had been through a series of relationships. If you imagine a guy that's been pent up and then he gets let loose in the heterosexual world, and what a moron I was, and how evil I was as far as how I treated women, and how clingy I was and jealous, and I'm manipulative now, but I am by my nature, I'm an extremely manipulative person because I can be. And when I'm a physically weak person growing up, is one of the few tools that I had was to manipulate people, because otherwise I could get hurt. So I I really did not know that I loved my wife or that I was falling in love with my wife. I just liked being with her. And she left the hospital before I did, and I was scheduled to stay longer. And then all of a sudden, everything I did was about getting in the hospital so that I could visit and hang out with her. Now, in my mind, I tell you the truth, I was not even thinking romantically about her. I didn't feel like I was in love with her, just like being around her, and not even making the connection of all the things that I was doing, because I got out of the hospital and immediately my mom got me a job where she worked, and all of it was so that I could get a phone card. Remember when you had phone cards? Remember phone cards? Uh, so all of it was to get a phone card so that I could call my wife, well, not my wife at that point, and I would read poetry to her. I'd talk all night, and it was all about just getting a car. And I got this ugly car, rusty. It was literally like the hood was all rust, the roof was rust. It was aptly named Rusty. The radio was missing, wires were on it. It was a $300 car, but it worked. And I lived in Harrisburg. She lived in Bethlehem, which is where we live now. And I drove the 1.5 hours to see her, and we were supposed to. I think we were supposed to go dancing. Still, no clue. And this is where I think the Holy Spirit was intervening, because I'm an atheist at the time, and I definitely did not want to be romantically involved in this point, because I'm a disaster, and all the women that I'd been with in the last year, they hurt me bad. I mean, I deserve to be hurt, but they hurt me bad. So I was not in any mood for this, and I think that God put this block on me to see. And we didn't end up going dancing, and we were talking, and she made the move, and she grabbed my hand, and she started, "Oh, let me read your palm." And so she made the move, and that's when it clicked. And then we kissed. That's all we did. And then I left, and I really hated leaving. It was painful to leave. I was instantly in love with her. Everything made sense all of a sudden. Oh, okay. And I came back the next week, and I visited her, and we spent, I tell you the truth, at least 2 days, maybe 3 days. The only time we got up was to go to the bathroom. We didn't eat, and all we did was hug each other on a couch. And that was, it was pretty great. I'm not a hugger. So it was, and I had gone all these years without romantic love, and I hadn't, the women, I really like strong women. I don't like weakness in general. And my wife is very strong, but she's also very tender, which is a really hard combination to find. Very strong, very independent, but also she's like me. Like her and I, we could go off, do our own thing. We're fine, but we need that time together. But we don't need to be on each other all the time. But we need each other, and we need each other. Like we say, we love each other every day. We have for 20 years. We still like madly in love. It's a matter of fact, it's way more now than it was. And yeah, it was a supernatural, and the supernatural occurrence was that God blocked me from seeing what was going on. And I was not an atheist at the time, and my wife inadvertently led me to Christ because she was a Christian. And I was like, I do not want to destroy this woman's faith. I am not going to attack her and her Christianity. And I was watching The Last Temptation of Christ, and I had this epiphany thought, and this was when I became saved. And I remember the day, July 9th, 2001, which was, let's see, I had already proposed to I met my wife in February 2001. I proposed to her in April of 2001. She said yes. But July 9th, 2001, I was saved because I had intellectually realized that I always thought Christ died for my sins, so he was beat. So he was hung on a cross, big deal. I know many people that died far more horrible deaths than Christ did. What's the big deal? And then it hit me that it was as I viewed it, and I still think I'm right, and maybe not, maybe you won't agree, but that Christ, that he experienced sin. He had to experience it to pay the price for it. So he experienced raping children, millions of children. He experienced murder. He experienced all the horrors of the horrors. He did all that. He did all my horrors. That was a big thing, my horrors. And it wasn't an emotional conversion, although it's highly emotional now. But that was the thing, that there's no other God out there that's done that. Not even close. That you can imagine for a millisecond taking on the sins of the world if you think of it like I do, or you have to know it. Now, he didn't know it like he did it, but he knew it like he felt the consequence of it. So this is how I feel. So to know that amount of sin, like the sin of all that was, and that all is yet to come, like every sin that I commit today is a sin that he's paid for. This is why, like, I saw, I know we're running a little bit long. I just want to end with this maybe. I saw Paul, uh, um, wow. I have, by the way, I have what's called adrenal pots, and adrenal pots, I get brain fog. So it's really hard for me to pull out names. I know them well, but like Paul, I can't remember his last name. Our Paul.
Paul Vandership.
Yeah, there you go. But he was talking about Russell Brand is and Jordan Peterson, and they had this conversation.
I haven't watched that one yet.
Well, they had this conversation where Russell Brand is asking him the Job problem, and I'm like screaming at Paul through my screen. I have an answer, but and the answer is, the answer was for Russell Brand. What they're trying to struggle with is how is it that you could live a perfect life and still suffer? Like Job led the sinless life, and yet he suffered. Not only did he suffer, but God allowed Satan to punish him, basically, and he didn't do anything wrong. So how is that? And Job is kind of, I know he's a foreshadowing of Christ, but it's also a foreshadowing of our relationship. Although Job didn't have the benefit of the knowledge of the cross, although he did have the cross because Christ died for his sins too, and brought him into the covenant too. But Job, if he had known what we know, which is that we already have our blessing, like our prosperity has been gained on the cross. Like 2,000 years ago, our life was fulfilled. Like everything in this life going forward is bonus, and the suffering that we experience is an opportunity in that suffering to remain faithful and true and strong in Christ as a testament, that we allow our pain and our suffering to be how people see Christ. That we bring people to Christ through it's an opportunity. So when we say if you live a perfect life, if you walk through the Beatitudes, the first part is blessed are the poor. That's the first step. Blessed are the poor is poor in spirit. And spirit is knowledge. Spirit is knowing. Spirit is doing. It's the doing. It's to know that you are poor in your doing. You can't do it. That's the first. That's the fear of the Lord. That brings the fear of the Lord. And you go through that whole bless those who mourn. I'll take it to and it ends with at the very end, blessed are the peacemakers. That's the height of your faith, is that you're a peacemaker, and you're not a peacekeeper. Peacekeepers divide people up, and that's what the world does. They just divide people up and avoid the real conflicts. It's kind of what the SJWs are doing now. They're trying to divide people up to avoid the real conflicts. Is what they're really doing, because they're addressing real conflicts, and we have an opportunity to become peacemakers, that we dive into the fray. We're not afraid of the conflict. We're not afraid of the beatings that we'll get from the conflict. We're not like Jeremiah dove in and did what he did in the midst of knowing people were going to beat on him because he was telling bad news. And that was the peacemaker thing to do. And our reward for being a disciple, for being the apex of Christianity, to the apex existentiality of Christianity, is that we're peacemakers who will suffer persecutions. They will lie, they will slander, they will kill. That's our reward on earth. And so Job is perfectly understandable within that frame. But I wanted to end with that. Yeah. If I could say that to Paul.
Yeah, I hope he gets to see it.
Well, I'll say it to Russell Brand. Say it to him, because he's the one. I think Paul knows it, but Russell Brand needs to hear it. Well, not from me, whatever. But if that message could, Russell Brand, Jordan Peterson, I have an answer. I don't have an answer. God has an answer.
Well, I like the way you put it, because what I've always thought about Job is that what Job didn't know and probably couldn't have known is that his story is on the much larger time scale, so that his story speaks to all people through all ages.
Yeah.
And
He is a witness to Christ through his
yeah,
suffering, like the ultimate. Like everybody talks about Job, but nobody can look away from Job. Because, dude, I won't say that he did nothing wrong, because there's only one that was without sin, but in essence, he did nothing wrong. I also think it's interesting, well, with Job, that he was kind of fine with his kids being gone. He was kind of fine with suffering economic hardship. Where it really hit him was when his pain and suffering became visible to everybody else. That's when it was a problem. When he had the boils on his face, and I don't think it was the pain of the boils. I think it was visible, and that's when he's like, oh, I want to die, because then all his friends could see on the outside, and he lived in a world in which pain and suffering was, and we still suffer that from this to this day. That pain and suffering is the fruit of unrighteousness. That's why I hate word of faith, name it, and claim it folks so much, because they put that burden on people. You know, you just got to pray harder. You know.
yeah, that was the very first thing I ever noticed about the word of faith. When I shortly after I became a believer, I ran into some of those people, and that was exactly what I thought. But the other thing is that we don't know when the time will come when the great persecutions will wave through America. Other
Right.
Christians have faced the great persecutions
Far
throughout
worse.
history, and you need to have the the Job mentality in order to be prepared for those times. And it may
Yeah.
be that we need to be learning. I mean, if Russell Brand is asking that question, maybe it's because that question is going to be on people's minds, so that we will become prepared, so that we will become stronger as a people,
And I
especially
think the
against
answer,
coming
and
persecution.
I think the answer to that is you. Like I do think that I was supernaturally brought into the faith, the conversion, the final conversion, and I have a date for that. It's interesting in my life how many dates that I just have. May 9th, 2005, I had, basically, I experienced like I was at the foot of the cross. Even though I was walking around, I was perfectly aware that was in my living room, but I was also at the cross. I was both places, and it was very real. And it was, I could really, I could somehow taste the sweat and smell the blood. That's what it was. And it was, I don't want to enter into it too much because I'll become a blathering mess, but it was grief, it was anguish, it was death, my death, like my sins, and it was hatred of myself because I was killing Christ. My sins were killing Christ. Not, not, not in the physical, not even in the spiritual, because he did give up the spirit, but in the soul, I wasn't killing his soul. And the spirit to me is the part that allows us to move in the world. But um, I was just totally broken. And for the first half of the day, I was crying, just in pain, crying. My daughter was a newborn. She was born November 19th, 2004, and I was a stay-at-home dad. I took care of her, and then I had the second half of the day, which was I was in the empty tomb, and I could smell the must, and I could echo my voice. Although at the same hand, I wasn't. I was at home. I perfectly knew I was at home, and I knew that I was having a, whether it was a vision or whatever you want to call it, an experience. And then I was like, David, you know, when he finally gets the, well, I think it was after, I remember this great. I think that it was after he got the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and he was all joyous and he did his stupid dance. And Micah was like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, screw you. I was like that. And I was like, ah. And that is the fear of the Lord is the cross, and the love of the Lord is the empty tomb. And that is, if you walk deeply in that, if you get weighed low by the cross and you get risen high by the empty tomb, like that experience I keep coming back to, that is the thing that makes me, I mean, I have a lot of pain for 3 years until very recently. For 3 years, I've been basically shut off from the world because of the pain in my life. It's chronic. It's high. It's, some days are incredibly high, and really, it's because of the cross that I look at and I say, there's an opportunity here in my suffering, because I'm not looking at my suffering as, oh, why, Lord, can't you give me a good life because he already gave it to me? Done. My good life has already been made. And if people could actualize that their prosperity, their hope, all of it, their apex existentiality has already been fulfilled in Christ. And I hope we can have another conversation. I could talk to you about apex existentiality, because I believe that what I might theoretically have is a semi sort of phenomenological description of Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so they cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. And then the other end, this is Romans 1:19 through 20. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. And I believe what I'm describing is the seed that's in you. And the seed that's in you, it's in your heart. And there's a stone heart and a flesh heart. And your apex existentiality, it goes very differently depending on which ground your seed is growing in, whether it's the stone or the flesh. And if it grows in the flesh, you end up in an indirect pursuit of the apex existential through Christ. And if it's not, then you end up directly pursuing the apex existential, and you turn into an upside down Christ. And I'm gonna spell the word out, because I know your YouTube channel. It's PEAD. You know, I won't spell the rest, but it's that spirit. I think that's the upside down Christ spirit, where Christ came to sacrifice himself voluntarily, consensually, for sinners who hate him, who want him killed, who are killing him. And this spirit demands that children be sacrificed against their will, literal children and even adult children, that they be sacrificed against their will, so that those with power can continue to sin. And that's what I hope to map out for you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna send you a link of the first time I talked to Paul, because I sketched out something that, if I had had the terminology apex existentiality, I might have put that name on it, but I didn't have the terminology. And I don't know what your apex existentiality is, but I'm going to send that to you anyway. You can watch it and see what you think.
I did not know that you interviewed Paul, or
Yeah,
that he was on your channel.
I've been on his show twice. So, I mean, I didn't interview Paul.
Oh,
He
you were on
talked to
his
me.
channel.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, send me
And
that link. Oh, I definitely want to see that.
he's the one who encouraged me to start this channel. So,
Well, I'm glad you did, because you're bringing in really interesting people. And I like
it's
that.
been an immense amount of fun. I love every minute of it.
Yeah, well, and really, you know, God works. God's a mesh thinker. I like mesh thinking. I don't know. I invented a term, although I don't think I did, because I think other people have used it before me. But mesh thinking is when you're about ready to enter into a space that you know you're going to be entering into in advance. You work to try to maximize your effect on the maximal amount of, like, you not just like, if I want to play baseball, I want to figure out what else can I do. Like, if I'm a disciple of Christ, how do I affect everyone around me in the most Christ-like way in my baseball playing, for instance. So I think God is moving here, and like, you know, he's moving for your purpose, well, for his glory, but your purpose in what you're doing. But you're like me. This has been the story that I told you. I've been nervous. I've never told anybody about my relationship with Bill, other than very few people. My wife knows, my daughter knows, few key family members and friends, but I've never told anyone that story. I've never told anyone that. And I chose you to tell that story, because you're a Christian artist. And so you provided for me. And I didn't really want to say that. I didn't want to do a video by myself. I wanted to have a foil. I wanted to be able to have somebody to talk to share the story. So,
Well, so is
yeah,
it okay with you if I publish this, or do you want?
absolutely.
Oh,
Totally. Yes. No, 100%. Yeah. That's why I did it, because it's time.
yeah.
It's time. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
story that I've been waiting to tell.
we will get together again. So
All
I
right.
look forward to
Well,
that. Thank you
this
so
is
much.
this has been awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.